Today, the sky is filled with mechanical wonders. Supersonic fighter jets, untrackable stealth aircraft, and cargo planes that can take your mail across the world in just under a day. Sometimes it's weird to think that just over a century ago, airplanes were just canvas on a metal frame, more akin to kites than the marvels of engineering they are today. I'm going to introduce you to the days of early aviation, a time where pilots took to the skies over the trenches, their aircraft just as dangerous as a bullet from the enemy. When the war broke out in 1914, aviation was not the priority of any side. Having been invented only a decade prior in 1903 by the Wright brothers, the full potential of airplanes was yet to be realised. The British Royal Flying Corps, then a part of the Army, predates the First World War by 2 years. The initial purpose of the aircraft was to be used for reconnaissance purposes, being fitted with cameras and maps so that they could be used to gain aerial views of battlefields and to direct artillery. During this time, both the Central Powers and the Entente only had a few aircraft each, nowhere near enough to be used to harass the enemy from above. An early model used by the British was the Avro 504, a two-seater plane which looked like a strong gust of wind would snap it in half. And that's hardly an exaggeration either. In 1917, German ace Heinrich Guntermann was doing aerobatics in his Fokker DR-1 when the top wing broke up mid-air, causing him to crash. Although this was a German plane, this happens to aircraft used in both sides of the war. And you'd think the pilots of malfunctioning planes would have the chance to bail out, right? Wrong. Parachutes during the First World War were too heavy and cumbersome to be used in every airplane. Therefore, if your plane was going down, you would either have to try to land it, or just accept your fate. In the early days of aerial combat, navigators would just fire their rifles and pistols at each other, hoping to get lucky. But soon they managed to attach machine guns to the aircraft, which made the airplane a far more formidable vehicle. On the 5th of October 1914, history was made. A French Voisin 3 biplane equipped with a Hotchkiss machine gun opened fire on a German B-2. Despite taking a few magazines and the gun jamming, the German plane eventually went down, killing both the pilot and the navigator. This marked the first aerial kill in history. Soon the vision for weaponised aircraft was realised, but there were a few issues that needed to be sorted. Firstly was the issue of fitting a machine gun, because fitting the propeller at the front of the plane made it far more easy to fly, as well as increasing its manoeuvrability. Therefore, the location of the propeller could not be moved. This meant that the gun had to either fire through it, or around it. There were efforts to mount machine guns onto the planes, yet these were either too heavy, required another crew member, or were just too impractical. In late 1915, the German Air Force managed to implement a synchronization gear into its aircraft. This meant that the machine guns could fire in between the turns of the propeller without destroying it. It became widely successful, and soon after, the aircraft of the Entente developed it too. This was the start of fighter aircraft. The way prospective airmen were taught differed greatly from the pre-war era to the end of the conflict. At first, there were very few planes used by each side, and therefore being a pilot was very competitive, often only reserved for the nobility. During the pre-war years, the training for pilots was lackluster and almost bare, with only a few instructors, many of which did not know how to fly themselves. But fortunately, because they had plenty of time to learn, the trainee pilots were taught not just how to fly, but were also taught the mechanics of the plane as well as the laws of physics that made it so. In fact, the airmen were taught to actually avoid other aircraft in combat due to their role as reconnaissance vehicles, which was, at the time, their sole and primary mission. Initially, The first class of the Royal Flying Corps had only 14 students, which, compared to the 1,000 of March 1918 alone, shows how far aviation came in just under a decade. In 1916, the doctrine changed. Due to technological advances, pilots were expected to use their aircraft for offensive actions. Therefore, 3 hours of bomb training and 3 hours of machine gun firing were added to the curriculum of trainee pilots. But reconnaissance was still an important role, with it taking up over half of the practical hours pilots were allocated. During the First World War, pilots had a reputation as being poorly trained, with life expectancies of only a couple weeks.
Right, well, I'll see you in 10 minutes for takeoff.
Hang on. What about the months of training?
Hey, wet pants! This isn't the Women's Auxiliary Balloon Corps. You're in the 20-minuters now.
Sir?
Yes,
sir.
Pratt at the back.
I think we'd all be intrigued to know why you called the 20-minuters.
Oh, Mr. Thicker, imagine not knowing that.
Well, it's simple. The average life expectancy for a new pilot is 20 minutes.
A potential reason for this could have been in the instructors, or the curriculum trainee pilots were taught. There were reports of instructors being unmotivated and underqualified, just having completed flying training themselves. Not only this, but the flight school's rigorous classroom lectures hardly helped the pilots become effective in combat. One account claims that a pilot having recently graduated crashed his aircraft twice in the first week of his deployment in France. Therefore, he was subsequently sent back to England and retrained. Oddly enough, his exam ratings in flight school were deemed promising. Another story tells of a pilot deployed to France who was completely unable to fly an aeroplane, stating that he had no training whatsoever on how to fly one. What was most shocking to the commanding officer was that his report card was marked well, and that it had to be the poor training from the instructors that caused this major error. Soon, by 1917, it was understood that air superiority was the objective for the Royal Flying Corps. Therefore, despite heavy losses, more material and funding was diverted to training, in order to get the pilots up to the standards of the Germans. For instance, in 1918, training went as follows. The first 2 months of training was dedicated to discipline, fitness, military drill and navigational communication classes. Then, trainee pilots were expected to spend 3 months getting accustomed to the aircraft, with at least 25 hours of airtime. Then they were expected to complete another 3 months of training with at least 5 hours of flight time on a modern aircraft which they would use in combat. Finally, they were examined in reconnaissance and cross-country flying, where if successful, they would become pilots. Now having graduated, it was time for pilots to enter the battlefield. Initially, the skies were dominated by German planes, who had superior tactics and equipment. The German ace Oswald Boelcke designed a list of rules that would make the German Air Force have an advantage. These included firing only at a short range, flying with the sun against you, always keeping a line of retreat, and ensuring that no airplane flew alone. German airplanes obliterated British and French squadrons, despite often being outnumbered 3-1. But in 1917, the British released the Sopwith Camel, an aircraft that would prove a formidable opponent to the German Air Force. Its design and armament made it an excellent dogfighter with exceptional manoeuvrability, and although difficult to fly, in the right hands, it could win the war in the air. Soon, in 1918, these airplanes became available in large numbers. And, with metal and rubber being hard to find in the starved economy of Germany, they no longer had a size or a skill advantage. And in the end, for Germany and the Central Powers, the war was lost. And unfortunately, approximately 40% of German pilots and 30% of French and British pilots would not survive the war. This goes to show how dangerous being a pilot was. There wasn't a safe moment, and disaster was around the corner every time they took to the skies. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you would like me to keep making more history videos.